This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
The Chapel Probation podcast takes a critical look at evangelical colleges and universities, focusing initially on Azusa Pacific University, where I taught English for 15 years. I'm Scott Okamoto, and I'm writing a book about how I deconstructed from faith completely while at APU. This podcast, though, is my tribute to the students and other faculty who survived evangelical higher education. They faced ridiculous racism, sexism, anti-LGBTQ hatred, and all manner of bigotry. From the heartless evils of the prosperity gospel to the destructive pseudo-theology of purity culture, the stories will break your heart, but they will also inspire. These people faced bigotry and fought back. In a weird, kind of sick way, we went through some shit, but we formed identities and we formed communities through it all. I hope you will join us.
I think the reason we were there is because there were a lot of benefits. And obviously, through the positionality of, your race and gender, that varied. But I think that when I've spoken to a lot of people, it's the community that keeps folks there. Mm-hmm. So even as you're seeing these things that are problematic and harmful and your red flags of ethics are going up and Carl's crying again and you're like, I still think he's faking it. There's so much there that you're wanting to stay for and not jeopardize. I don't want to jeopardize this community.
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality. So today on the show, we have a friend of mine, Wes Curtis, who is joining us to kind of talk about his own story of deconstruction, I guess his faith history a little bit. And the reason that we have asked Wes to join us is because the way we met was through a little church that many people might know as the one that's currently in the headlines. I feel like they've always been in the headlines. But Wes, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad you're here. I'm pumped to have this conversation.
Exciting. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited to, trauma bond with you.
Oh, we're going to relive some good times.
We do a lot of that. I mean, healing is a process, and we do a lot of it out loud with people who definitely have been through and understand the wildness that is this journey. Because I don't know if you ever talk to anyone who hasn't grown up in church about church stuff or like the healing process, and you start telling them stories and you just watch their eyes get really, really wide, and you're like, I forget how not normal this is. This all because this was my life. Like, this was so normal.
Right. They can sort of conceptualize it like in the abstract, but there's something about someone who's gone through it that gets it. There's a lot less explaining you have to do and a lot of just mutuality there from the jump. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Nate and I definitely trauma bond over our ex-evangelical stuff. Like when we met, it was like, oh, we love the same hockey team. That's amazing. That was how we actually met. Like it was through our love of the same. I thought he was from Montreal, actually. I was like, oh, he has a Habs jersey. He's from Montreal. And then I click and I'm like, New Jersey? How did you get where did you become a Habs fan? How are you a Montreal Canadiens fan? Where did this come from? And then we started talking, and then he got into his church history, and I was like, oh, wow. Like, I totally get this completely. Yeah. This makes complete sense to me. And it was like, so you start to have so much in common when you've grown up, in evangelicalism.
So Wes, give us a little bit of your background. Were you born and raised in a Christian household, or did you convert at some point a little later in life? What's your story?
Yeah, I was. I was born into a Methodist household. So my parents were career Christians. It actually goes back a couple of generations. My mom's dad was a Methodist pastor. My mom married my dad, who was studying to be a Methodist pastor, and then he became a pastor. So I grew up in a Christian household, and it was what I knew growing up. I attended small rural churches in North Carolina where, the racism was rampant, and there were a lot of very explicit boundaries and delineations on who could come and participate. And I watched my dad really work against that. I was telling Janice when we were talking about this, he had this like notorious like country club sermon where he, looked at all the white people and said, this is not Christian. This is not a church. This is a country club. And here are the ways that we would be able to change that. I don't think he lasted, but about 6 or 9 months later, after that, they got him out pretty quickly.
I think having a Southern hospitality politeness could cover up for that kind of statement.
No, it does not contain the rage that followed that sermon. Yeah.
Bless all of your hearts. Nope. Okay,
I know.
Never mind.
So I grew up in this weird tension of my parents making money from the church as an institution and as a livelihood, but they were not very overtly legalistic, or they didn't put a lot of doctrinal pressure on my sister and I. So they did it as a job. It was their job, and then we believed what we wanted. And in college, I left Christianity. Well, I didn't leave Christianity. I left church. I didn't do church in college. And then when I moved to New York to pursue acting in 2009, I was like, I think I want to get involved into a church and find a family and a home. And that was a motorcycle. And I think if I look back now, it was because I didn't know anyone. I moved to New York alone. I didn't really know people, and that was me seeking community, which I think is probably the biggest draw for churches in general and the biggest need that's met there.
You were familiar with Hillsong, obviously. From Hillsong, music was sort of known everywhere.
I wouldn't say that I knew it in the way that people revere it as sort of a genre-defining company. I think I maybe recognized the songs, but I tried a couple of churches. I was at a couple of churches before I experienced Hillsong New York City. So Hillsong, I think they landed in 2010-ish. I think that's when they Carl was here and they were starting their monthly services. And how did I even find out about them? I don't even remember how I found out about them, but I went into a service in 2011 and I was already deeply involved in a different church, but this just experiencing, the experience of Hillsong New York City was overwhelming. And
what is the Hillsong experience for people like me who didn't, and you and Nate have experienced the Hillsong? You both can tell me what it's for those listening who only know of the music genre of Hillsong. What's it like to go to Hillsong Church? What's that draw? What does that Hillsong experience look like?
Wow.
Who wants to go first?
Oh man.
Overwhelming, I think, is one way to describe it. You sort of just feel immersed.
Very immersive.
Yeah.
I love that word. Very immersive.
Yeah.
Very emotional.
I was very involved in fact, I was on the ministerial staff of another church that was, I think, just large enough to categorize as a megachurch, but didn't really, it was just over that threshold of what sociologists might consider a megachurch, quote unquote, even though it felt pretty small. But they had the whole post-grunge rock thing going, but they were more of the doctrinal purity. They were very Calvinist. They loved to have those very strict sovereignty and wrath of God. That was the big thing. And the emotional pull was just not there because they wanted you to logic your way through all of this. And that didn't fit me. And I lasted about 5 years at that church. And then after resigning, Hillsong kind of felt like a logical next step for me because I was reacting so heavily to that environment of, that strict, wrath of God kind of thing.
Yes.
And Hillsong loved to emphasize the love of God. And it was a very emotional, heartstring kind of environment. So that's what drew me in.
It wasn't a way that you were used to doing worship before. It wasn't something you were super familiar with.
For me, a little bit, because the church I was at previous was kind of emulating Hillsong a little bit, and that's when I first discovered
the one before the Wrath of
the one
God.
before, right. So if you've been listening to the podcast,
God Church, we're just going to call it that.
If you've been listening to the podcast, you probably know a few of the names.
Which one is which?
Right.
Okay. Who was interviewed from which church? Nate's just going through his trauma church history on the podcast with everyone.
Whatever you need to do, Nate, you do it.
So the church I was at previous to Hillsong was a church called Emergence. And then prior to that was another church that was kind of like a a Hillsong wannabe to a degree. They were more of like a Baptist type of church, but they loved the music, the Hillsong music and everything. And they pulled off this, for a local, like smaller mega church, they definitely pulled off the Hillsong vibe as well as you can, right? For a smaller church. But but that's when I first discovered Hillsong United concerts. We went to a bunch of concerts, and then somebody who had worked for Hillsong and had been on tour with their band ended up working on staff at that church. So that was my exposure to Hillsong. It was pretty early on. It was before Hillsong landed in New York. I discovered them, I think, around 2007, 2008, even though I knew about some of their songs like Shout to the Lord and whatnot from the 90s. 2007, 2008 was when I really discovered like Hillsong as this music genre defining organization. But yeah, so to answer your question, Gail, Hillsong, yeah, definitely I would go with overwhelming and immersive as my descriptor for that.
Yeah, because you have this, I mean, the music and the production value is the main priority. They want it to be immersive. So you come in, and as soon as you walk in the building, you're hit with sound, just a wall of sound. There's a social atmosphere of like openness. Everybody has these bright eyes and these smiles. Everyone is like really young, mostly very, very attractive. The speaking is very like motivational, like very Tony Robbins. So you've got all of this recipe of like just attraction, music, sound, vibes, people, motivation, love, like you were saying, Nate. And so it all makes this concoction of just overwhelm, intense emotion, and you respond. Your body is just like, oh my God, everybody. I remember the first time I went in to this service, I was in the balcony of Irving Plaza. And they were singing, and everybody had their hands raised. And I was like, well, I'm from the Methodist church. I'm like, what is this hand raising thing? But because everybody was doing it, it's like sort of the sheep theory. It's like because everyone's doing it, it was very normalized. And so I was like, fuck it, I'll try it. And felt great. It's a very like vulnerable position to put yourself in while you're sharing this intimate moment with others. So there's so many. I would love for somebody to do a psychological study on that experience. What is happening psychologically in that moment? Because it's fascinating. It really is.
Right. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I grew up Pentecostal and hands raised was a thing. And then I was in churches that didn't do that. That was, that weren't charismatic. And for sure that I think maybe I was on an opposite trajectory to you, Nate, where I started with something so charismatic and I noticed the emotional manipulation, or I sort of felt that like, you're playing the same song for the 10th time and then everyone's breaking down in tears, whereas in the beginning they weren't. And it's like, they're softening you up through so I think I felt safer when I got into a church that didn't do that, where it was like,
that's
okay,
interesting.
But I do wonder how much, your raised hands contributes, how does it create an emotional vibe for you? All the different aspects of it, not just the music, but even the way they tell you to express your body language, the way they show you to express your body language.
They model it.
The way they model it all around you. So if you're like standing there stiff, you're going to look kind of weird in that environment. Like, what's wrong with you? At least, I don't know if that's, maybe Hillsong's so big it doesn't feel like that. But I remember my old church, like if 90% of the people are doing that, then the other 10 look like something spiritually wrong with them. Like maybe you're closed off to God and you're not letting his presence in your life. Like that's sort of you look like that compared to everyone around.
Well, I definitely had those thoughts. The first team that I served on at Hillsong, I was like walking around the auditorium counting how many hands were raised during the altar call. And but I remember just standing there and watching people who, some people who just weren't raising their hands during the worship music. And I'm like, oh, they're not feeling it. The Holy Spirit's not moving with them.
Something's going on in their life.
They're
closed off to God.
Yep, keeping some secrets.
The Spirit can't penetrate through that wall. Oh, man.
Yeah. So your involvement then in Hillsong, because I feel like when around the time I met you, you were pretty involved. You were doing stuff, right? Yeah. So what was that track like? From standing in the balcony of Irving Plaza to then joining teams.
It was a quick track. I think I was listening to you and Janice talk this week, and I recognized the difference that I had in being a, cis heterosexual white male, of I fit in. So I walked in and I could speak the language. I could, I had all the values and the culture down. And so I started leading a connect group pretty early on. I mean, I met the leaders and mingled, and I want to do more. I was ready to go all in. And when people are willing to give a lot of their time and they fit the bill, they give a lot of responsibility. So I started leading connect group. I got really involved with the creative team because I was an actor, so I was kind of connecting with actors. I was a singer, so I was doing like frontline vocals, and it felt very seamless. It was just sort of like, you meet this person, hey, Wes is great. Oh, cool. Do you want to do more stuff? Yeah, I'd love to. I started leading the crew team first. I think crew was the teardown setup. So I was one of the crazy people that was willing to get there at 5:45 in the morning, or drive a truck at
you were really
1 a.m. once they were done. I was so on fire for. Oh God. There's the trauma. I was just wondering, when is it going to start? When's the anxiety going to start kicking in?
Don't worry.
I think that was the. What's that?
We're in it with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is a safe space.
Yep.
I think the crew, I really paid my dues in the crew team. And I think that's why they started giving me a lot of responsibility, because they saw me stacking chairs week after week after week after week. Then I think, Nate, I met you after I had started to do like a lot more creative producing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I was there for 7 years. So over 7 years, I started with sort of the crew stuff. And then because I was an actor, I wanted to do more creative things. So I kind of shifted into more of creative producing. So when conferences would come into town, I was really involved with that. Really involved with like special events, special moments. I led a connect group like almost the whole time I was there.
So
you mentioned listening to Janice talk and our conversation and realizing, you kind of, it was a different trajectory for you, because as a cis het white man, like it is a different trajectory. How? I mean, I guess my question is, how does it start to hit you? Like what was it taking for you to sort of go, I'm not sure, I'm really like something's off, or like the stuff that would take someone who's not cis het white maybe quicker to see? What did it take for you, let's say, for the curtain to be pulled back in terms of areas of inequality or things that are, or am I jumping too far ahead in this conversation too fast?
I don't think so. No, I think that's a great question, because that is, it's sort of like, when did you start seeing those things? And unfortunately, ashamedly, way too late. I think I first noticed it with the LGBTQ community, because I had these really, really close friends of mine were on platform, playing instruments, or Josh Canfield is a good friend of mine. So I was very personally involved with the boundaries and the exclusionary conversations that were happening very explicitly, where leadership would say to my gay friend, you can't have that flag symbol on your laptop if you're going to be playing keys on stage, because that's promoting, a gay culture, which we can't do. My friend was like, oh, of course, I'll take it down. I think that's those kinds of conversations. I was like, this is kind of fucked up. Like, why is this such a big deal? And then the Josh, I forget what year the Josh stuff went down.
I think it might have been 2015, 2014 or something like that. Somewhere around that. It was right as I first started attending, I think was when the Josh stuff went
This is
down.
what we referred to at Janice as a gay meeting, right? Is that?
Yeah. The Josh stuff, the Josh tension led to the gay meeting, because it was like, and Josh was a great friend of mine.
You have to go back to that episode if you guys want to know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Listen to the Janice episode. Oh God, I was at the gay meeting. Josh invited me.
You. Oh.
Yeah, I was invited. He was like, because I'd been talking to him about this, and I was like, dude, this is messed up. Like, what can we do? How can we rectify this? This is not okay. And he was like,
but you were realizing this as a straight man while you were in church, because I had to be out of church before I started to recognize this as a problem. When you grew up Methodist, it wasn't trained into you. Homosexuality is a sin. It wasn't. It was.
It was. So I think it was my relationship with these friends
That started
that
to make it feel fun.
that helped me see a different perspective. And I think I'd started deconstructing other things there before that time. So like 2014, I started looking at the Bible and inerrancy and heaven and hell, and so I'd started kind of pulling pieces out of the Jenga tower already. And then when my friends were having these experiences, my morals and my ethics started to butt up against the theology in ways that it hadn't before. Before there was just sort of the push it away, avoid it, don't have the conversation, give the trite catchphrase like we were saying before. Love this, love the sinner, hate the sin. There were ways that as a straight man I could absolve myself of having to cognitively deal with that dissonance. But now these people that I, cared about so much, I was seeing the toll it was taking. I saw the anxiety that was happening when people were coming in and not wanting others to know that they were out because they didn't want to lose their position on the platform.
Right.
They wanted to continue to sing. And so yeah, I think, Gail, to answer your question, I had already started to sort of deconstruct my faith in general and Christianity. And so I was more willing to be like, I don't have to agree with this, because you don't have to agree with everything.
Yeah.
Yes, but I went to the gay meeting and it was, God, I wish I could go back in time, I think like
What
with
would
all
have been
this,
different if you could go back in time? Why would
why
you want to go back in there?
because I would have called Carl's bullshit out. I would have seen through the manipulation. Carl and Joel were there, kind of just blanketing us with just manipulative statements and like, this is why we need to keep this at the family dinner table and not talk about this outside of this space, because this is something that we want to work through together, and just give us more time to sort through how we want to do this. And I think I asked Joel, I said, Joel, why can't we talk about like what we're saying right now? This is valuable. We're sharing space together and we're sitting down. Why can't we share this publicly? Why can't this be a public discourse? He was like, the media they take sound bites and they just twist it. So we got to keep it safe. And
That's a great impression.
I bought it.
It's a great impression, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nate does a good Brian Houston.
I heard it. I heard Brian.
You heard his Brian Houston.
Yeah. A lot of respect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Impression.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was one of the big pieces where I started to push against it. So I remember having a meeting with Kane and I said, look, man, so after the gay meeting, in the gay meeting, Carl's like, okay, we're going to do this again. I want to keep doing this. I want this to be part of the process of how we figure out basically how to toe the party line. How do we not lose the conservative money in our church, but also
still
not shame the LGBTQ community that's here. And I think the truth is you can't. But they tried, and they did for a long time. But I met with Kane, I remember, because they weren't meeting. Carl said, we're going to meet every week. And my friend who was a part of that, I think they did meet like 2 months later, and then they wanted to keep meeting. And Carl said, I don't want you guys to meet without me. But you're not meeting with us.
He's never around. Yeah.
You're not prioritizing this. So I went to Kane and I was like, look, this isn't okay. This is not okay. These folks need to meet together. They're experiencing really difficult things in this community that they need to be able to share with each other. And then I think they did end up having like some sort of a connect group. I don't know how long it lasted, but I was starting to push back against the leaders and say like, this is not okay. And, I had their ear. And so I think there was a little bit of pull that I was able to have. But yeah, that's kind of when it started. Yeah. I started kind of, raising my voice. Not enough and way too late, but I did a little bit.
And it would still be, so what year did you end up finally walking out the doors? Never
2018.
2018. Okay.
Yeah, so 7 years.
So it would still be a couple years. And, it's interesting hearing you say that, because all of that takes place 2-3 years before you ultimately walked out. Mm-hmm. And I remember during my exodus, the times where I noticed things were really off was still another 2 years before I actually was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I look back on that and I think, why the fuck did I not just walk away when I felt it was wrong? When I initially got that sense of this is all bullshit and it's hurting people. And
we can all see a whole lot more in hindsight. Like there's so much that, I mean, I think you were saying it maybe with Janice or maybe it was with me individually, that like your perspective when you left Hillsong versus even now watching the documentary, Nate, is totally changed. Even the benefits of the doubts that you gave back then, or even a year out of Hillsong, the benefit of a doubt you would have given to a Carl Lentz versus.
Yeah. And even Janice mentioned it too, right? She said, when the news about Carl dropped, she was like, well, 50% victim, 50% perpetrator, right? But now looking back at everything and understanding what all of those dynamics are.
Understanding the manipulation that was taking place. I mean, that's hard to see when you're in the moment, when you're being manipulated. Like you said, Wes, wanting to go back in time, because you can see things much more clear now in terms of what was just BS talking to shut people up. I don't know. I like to highlight this stuff and stick a pin in it for people and to pause and to freeze frame just so people realize, because I think we all have those feelings of, how did I not see? How come when I started to see, it took me so long to even get out? Like, I mean, there was obvious things that were starting to get my attention that I brushed aside, but it is such a big process to start to like, for your belief starts to collapse in on themselves. It's a big deal. There's a lot intertwined. Like you said, it's Jenga blocks. I like the idea of a tapestry woven and you're pulling out a thread. It doesn't all just, undo instantly. Sometimes it's like an unraveling and it takes some time to notice. And this piece brings clarity to that. And that happens way later, maybe even after you're out of it. So I guess I don't know. I hope that when people are listening and they relate to feeling like ashamed. I know that when we were watching the documentary at the end, Noemi was giving her story and she just sat there and she paused. Right, it was near the end of the documentary and she's sitting in the pew and she just kind of, I think she puts her head in her hands and just pauses at the question they asked her, just kind of stumped her on about staying and how it feels now or something like that. And I know Nate you started crying, babe, and you were overwhelmed with that, like recognizing and identifying with her feelings and you feeling that same way. And I think we've all had those moments of how did I get duped? How does it feel now looking back at all of this and what I was a part of along the way? And I think it's important for people to know there's nothing wrong with you. Your process of it taking a while is very common. It's quite a universal experience for deconstruction, and you're not dumb, you're not any of those feelings you're feeling about yourself. There's a lot the whole system was constructed in a way to keep you there as long as possible. Yeah. So when you started to see it, yes, of course, it's taken you a while and a lot of healing and a lot of outer perspective to recognize those things.
I mean, especially if you're in a demographic that gains a lot from this world, right? Like, as much as they like to present this front of being an egalitarian church with women pastors, they are very male dominated. And for you and me, Wes, as men, and also as non-Black men, we stood to benefit quite a lot from that system. We could talk that kind of language very easily. I mean, I don't think either of us would have to code switch at all. No. And as heterosexual men, we don't have to worry about being ostracized by that system.
I don't have to hide any part of my identity. I don't have to shift any part of my identity. I didn't have to code switch. I didn't have to change myself. And I could just be fully me, and it was promoted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that, Gail. I think that is really important to speak to, is the shame that can sometimes come from people who look back and think, why didn't I? I've literally had people message me that as I've posted on Facebook or had conversations. People will just be like, it's like they wake up from this stupor or something and they're just like, wait, what? How did I not do more? And talking about benefits, Nate, I think the reason we were there is because there were a lot of benefits. And obviously, through the the positionality of, your race and gender, that varied. But I think that when I've spoken to a lot of people, it's the community that keeps folks there. So even as you're seeing these things that are problematic and harmful, and your red flags of ethics are going up, and Carl's crying again, and you're like, I still think he's faking it. There's so much there that you're wanting to stay for and not jeopardize. I don't want to jeopardize this community. When I come in, I get 12 hugs before I get through the whole building. Right. As I'm learning more about psychology, I'm seeing that it's a survival. This is like evolutionary behavior, where like our social network is our survival. This for me, church was a part of my identity. It was a part of my survival. So to question that, takes a lot of self-reflection. Deconstruction is such a messy, shameful process, I think, sometimes for people, because you are seeing kind of the ugly sides of what you're involved in. Yeah. But evolutionarily, like, why would you leave your herd? That's not safe. So there's a lot working against the process of deconstructing or disaffiliating or deconverting. Psychologically, there's a lot against that. There's a lot of unconscious draw that keeps you from saying, I don't know if I agree with this. It keeps you from saying, I think I should challenge this, because I want to stay reaping the fruits of this worship, reaping the fruits of Connect Group, and being able to call my friends and talk about things. And, if I keep pulling pieces out of the Jenga tower, what if it falls?
What could you lose? Like, that's a huge question. And I think for depending, like, I don't know, I have these conversations so often with different people about walking away and what that means, and people who can walk away and not, and kind of have it easy in the sense of like, they didn't lose that much, and, oh, well, I'm moving on. I don't want to think about it or talk about it. And I'm like, what about the people who lose their family when they start deconstructing? What about the people who lose their mom and dad and siblings, and like, coming to those conclusions boots them out of their like, if you have people that will embrace you when you deconstruct, you are fortunate. You are you're very privileged in that sense to be able to keep that all intact, to keep your foundation intact. But for some people, it's losing everyone important to them to start to ask those questions, and they're left with nothing under. And I think, from my perspective anyway, it's pretty much impossible to start that process if you have nothing firm under your feet other than that. Like, if that's what's holding, if your belief in God, let's say, is what's keeping you alive, and you're like, without Jesus, I don't know, how I could live day to day. If that's where you are at, I wouldn't want to knock that. Like, I don't want to be the one to pull out your what's holding you up. Like, I think there's some questions you can't start to ask yourself at all if you're not in a secure place, if you're in an unsafe place, if you're in an unstable place where this is the only thing helping you tread through from day to day. And I find it a bit, I know I'm going on a side tangent, but I find it a bit worrisome that church sometimes even tries to present that to you as a positive. If you're more dependent on God, if he is all you have, he's all you need, and like, the more he's your everything, and the more he is the source of all of your hope and all of your everything, then the more spiritual you are considered. Right. So letting go of all the other stuff that might make you feel secure or might give you a sense of foundation is considered an act of faith. Sometimes it's considered an act of trust in God. It's considered a giving yourself fully over to God. And yet those are the very things that will keep you from asking those kind of questions, right? Because then the more you give up all those other pieces, the more there's now everything's in this one basket. So how do you start to go through that?
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick break from the conversation to let you know that we have a fantastic new way for you to support the podcast. If you like what you hear from our show and want to partner with us, head over to patreon.com/fullmutuality to donate. As a partner, you'll get exclusive content, access to occasional live recording events, and more for as little as $5 a month. Thank you already for your support of what we're creating, and now, back to the conversation. Some people have no choice but to pull at threads because their identity is in there. Right. And they are faced with, I either accept myself for who I am, or and lose everything, right? Right. So
sort of backed into the deconstruction.
Right.
Because it's like, if I stay here with the wolves, like, I smell like meat, I'm queer, or, I can't be fully me. I have to put this like fake animal skin on to try to not get eaten. And so there is like this survival component to being backed into deconstruction for some. And there is a privilege of being able to choose, I think I might think twice about this. I think I might start to doubt these things. Yeah, that's a good point.
Was there any blow, Wes, that was like, I don't know, sucker punch to the gut? Because you talked about deconstructing little by little, piece by piece, kind of going through different things that weren't sitting well with you. Inerrancy or hell, or then the gay one was huge because you have the people close to you. Was there something that knocked everything down and you're like, I'm done with church? Was there anything like that for you? Yeah.
Yeah, the 45th president of the United States.
Yeah.
Ooh, big topic.
Thank you. Thank you for that, DJT.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was the tip. That was the Jenga tower fell. I was seeing the response of evangelicalism to Trump's running for presidency and then getting elected. I was like, what the fuck? This is my
yeah. It's interesting to hear Americans say that. I'm Canadian, right? So like the evangelical community in Canada, if I'm going to give it a political character, they were not Donald Trump supporters. Like as a whole, Canadian evangelicals, everything else about Canadian evangelicalism mirrors what, when Nate and I chat, we have a lot, like it's similar. You get to Donald Trump and it's like, no, but Canadians don't see it like that. So I, on the outside, was floored when I was like 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. How'd that happen? So it's interesting to hear that. It was a shock to me, but it was a shock to you as well. As an American, as a white evangelical, you were surprised to know that this was your community as well. And you grew up in the South. So like, why was this? I'm fascinated, right? Like for me, I'm like, well, I guess I wasn't immersed in that American white evangelical culture. The Canadians didn't, I don't know, didn't see it, saw him very differently, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe my own naivete. Like I thought that the ideals of social justice and inclusion and, valuing the one, Jesus going and rescuing the one and leaving the 99. The Christianity has so many different flavors. Like the flavor of Christianity that I was surrounding myself by, whether it was my friends or Carl would say Black Lives Matter from the pulpit, though, he wouldn't back it up with action and wouldn't give seats at the table for, people of color that deserved it. But I think that the values that I thought evangelicals possessed as a whole would have unquestionably gone against everything Trump stood for. And so when I saw just this massive surge of support for this guy who was so clearly just, white supremacy and an orange toupee, like I was shocked. I was like, wait, these are the people, like, Bethel leaders. I listened to messages from these people and they're telling their congregations to vote for him. So this was a huge reckoning for me. And
were these conversations that like Bethel was having, was Hillsong as blatant in those kind of things? Or like, did you have these conversations? Were you in your circle at Hillsong hearing people be pro-Trump? Were you seeing that in your community?
No, I wasn't seeing a lot of explicit pro-Trump language or action.
So maybe that's why it was more of a surprise.
Yeah, maybe that's why it was a surprise. I think maybe that I was in a little bit of a bubble.
Because I noticed in certain places in the U.S., people are like hush hush about their opinions on this. Like they don't want to overtly tell you, yes, I support Trump. They kind of weigh it out to figure out where you are before they say anything about it.
Well, I think that was one of the big things about America. I think that outside of Christianity, that was the case. Like all the polls were showing Hillary winning, because I think that was that was a big swath of the population sort of hush hush, like we're going to vote for Trump, but we know it's like controversial, so don't tell anybody. But and then they did, and then he won. So I think I was in a bubble, and maybe the hush hush people weren't speaking up, and I didn't know that. But the people that were speaking up, the evangelical, I think maybe what it was Hillsong wasn't taking a stance. And I think that was really, really off to me. They would say Black Lives Matter, that was kind of the extent of it. I mean, Carl marched in some of the social justice marches, but that was it. And I was like, I was completely shocked. I was like, this can't be, this isn't me. This is not, I'm not like this anymore. You know?
Yeah. I think what's interesting too, like you mentioned the bubble, right? Being in a bit of a bubble, and that Hillsong didn't really take a stand. And I think part of the reason that they didn't take a stand is they like to set up in urban environments. Like their first location in the U.S. was New York City, and they set up in London and Paris, and so they're in these urban centers that would be by and large anti-Trump, anti-white white supremacy, anti-nationalism, and so it would have been detrimental to their brand and their population, the numbers of their congregation. It would have that would have caused a mass exodus, I'm sure, because it's such a city focused church, that if they had made any kind of statement, but of course, they have their shareholders, so they can't make anti-Trump statements because they still have to appease the money bags, but in order to keep people coming through the doors in those big cities, they have to keep quiet about that stuff. Whereas I think a place like Bethel, they're sort of out in the rural California,
Northern California.
Yeah. They can be a little bit more vocal about that. I was, and I was also thinking there's an element of privilege as well to being, because I mean, how many of my black friends said, that didn't surprise me. I'm not shocked.
Sure.
Like, we knew this is what this country was all about. You know? And I, as the numbers were coming in, I started doing a little bit of that, reflecting on, oh my God, it's real. This is what our country's all about,
Yeah.
So it was definitely a big wake up call. So yeah, I think, certainly for me, that was one of the catalyzing moments where I'm like, I'm not safe in a church where, I can look at the person that is standing next to me and wonder, did they vote for that guy?
Right.
Is this, is this person safe for
terrifying?
Me? Right.
Yeah.
And and the fact that I'm standing in this church and this is happening in the world, this is happening in the U.S., and from the platform, from the pulpit, no one is
Business
talking
as
about
usual.
it. Yeah. They're acting like this is just, it's just another election.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, when you had mentioned earlier about how sitting in those meetings, the kind of silence, even afterwards, that we're supposed to meet up again, but then it's not happening, and sort of the quietness about it, we care about you, but it's sort of in silence. There's a big silence about it. It's not, we love you and we embrace you. It's take that sticker off your thing. So because we're not ready for this kind of conversation, and let's just pray and hope. Did it feel a bit like, do you think you took those sort of pieces from how that topic was handled and started to see, wait a second, the fact that my church isn't speaking out against, they're quiet on this, that I need to be aware that this is problematic, that they're not taking a stand, like that need for some solid affirmation, some solid straight up, this is where we are on this, and this is how we feel, like that quietness, did it feel suspicious to you?
Yeah. I mean, I started to see, I'd always seen it, but it started to, I think, again, because my deconstructing, like you were saying, Gail, there was enough that I was seeing, I don't have to stay on this foundation. I have enough footing out here too, that I can question these things. So I started to see the same spirit of silencing these conversations and not talking about, not confronting, not having the conversations with these communities. I started seeing that in other areas too. I had friends that were leaving, because 7 years, the turnover rate, the window of turnover was, I don't know, was more like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So in 7 years, I saw the revolving door, people coming in, people going out.
That is a thing in churches to pay attention to. That revolving door. Most people end up seeing that happen, and that's a sign.
And so that was another indicator. That was another flag of like, what's going on here? And the people that were leaving were some of the most devoted, like sold out, like gave so much time and energy. I remember I had some friends that were literally like finance professionals, and they had given so much money. You know, they had their like rich people meetings where they would petition for more money from the people
foundation
that were richer. Yes, the foundation. And so they were like members of that, and they gave a lot of money, and they had proposed to Carl or like the finance team, like, we'd love to lend our abilities and our skills to help you all with budgeting and finances and all that, because we know New York is crazy and the real estate, and they shut them out. They said, no, we don't want you to see, we don't need you to see the ins and outs. And so they were very confused by that. I think they were a little offended, and they tried to have conversations with Carl and Kane, and basically they were met with the silence. So that sort of stonewalling and that sort of placating and appeasing of like, we should grab coffee. Let's get with my assistant, talk to my assistant. We'll get something on the books. Radio silence. So people were leaving like that. And I remember we had a meeting. Kane and Tolu called this sort of OG meeting. So there were, Tim wasn't there. There were, I'm trying to think if there's anyone there, Nate, that you might have known. But there was about 12 or 14 people that were like 2011, like me, started way back. And they wanted to just say, they wanted to create a space where we could be honest about what we think needed to change. And I was like, hell yeah, this is great. And this was what they did, right? They did just enough so that you thought they were listening and they were caring and things might change. And so
Janice
again,
referred to it as tricking the system. And I was like,
yes, exactly. They did it they were so good at it, So we had this meeting, and they were like, you've been here for 7 years. You all have really given so much of yourselves. We trust you and we respect your perspective. Let us know, what are you seeing? What's feedback? And at that point, I was very much like, I'm just going to shoot from the hip. I was kind of one foot in, one foot out. Were you on your way out?
Yeah, you're kind of like, if they're going to boot me for speaking my mind, I was already going to probably head that way.
Yeah, I was like, I'm headed that way. I might as well like throw some do the little exit interview on my way. But I mentioned like, look, you all are always comparing the church to how it's like a marriage and how you don't leave your spouse. And yet, it's a double standard, because where is you treating people that are leaving the church like a marriage, and you're asking them why they're going, because you're not doing that. And there were other things that were said that I would kind of raise my hand and say, I just want to kind of challenge that. And Tolu would laugh and be like, every time she'd say something, she'd be like, Wes, did you want to challenge anything? And after that meeting, I heard from other people that were there, people that were on staff. They told me that Kane said a couple of days afterward, like, this was valuable. We wanted to do it again, but we want to have people there that aren't so negative. So we want to make sure that the negative people don't come back.
We want the helpful feedback, as long as it agrees with where we are, and not anything that... And that's interesting too. I mean, the sinister side of me, when you said they wanted to have a meeting with people with their ear to the ground who've been there for the long term, I was just suspicious that they were like trying to mine for information of, okay, who's upset about what, and who are the people we need to look out for in this church, who are the divisive.
Well, I'm sure they were taking some of that information and forming more their spin, They were trying to get ahead of things, and the way they would do that is to create these little meetings where they could hear what people are worried about and what people are disgruntled about, and then somehow find a way to address them. And sure, we might lose these people that gave us this information, but there are probably a few people who might be a little concerned in these directions. So we'll take that information, we'll spin it, and then feed it to the congregation so that those those among this church who are a little bit concerned, but not as concerned as the ones who have just left, they'll be satiated.
Well, like I'm probably not going to be able to keep those angry ones, quote unquote, anyway. So
Right.
might as well, take their spin out of it and be able to turn my narrative easier in these meetings where people express concerns. But the gaslighting with the angry. I don't know. That's one of the first words I was ever called when I started to be vocal. I supported my daughter coming out as gay, as bi. But at the time, she thought she was gay, and it's a spectrum. She's figuring out where she is on things. She's dating a guy now. I'm sure it's made many people happy who are praying for her. But she's still bi. She still is who she is unabashedly. Is not trying to hide that from anyone. Is not doing it for anyone to accept her, which I'm very proud of her about. That she's just going with what she wants. But I said, if anyone wants to, because people were making comments when she came out publicly, and they were like, "We love you anyway." And I was like, if you want to love my daughter anyway, you can go fuck off with that. Like, I swore on my Facebook. I swore on my Facebook, and I got messages about how I've changed as a person. I used to be a spiritual person, but I'm an angry person now.
Yeah.
I'm an angry person. That was the first time I was really gaslit.
I'm glad you were angry.
There was a lot to be angry about.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I totally was angry.
Listen,
but it's interesting how that is a reason, like in your case too, right? You too had valid reasons to be angry, Wes. You had seen a lot in the time you were there. You weren't angry for nothing. This probably was a valid critique of where you were at, but it's interesting when that word angry is used to be like, you're an untrustworthy person. You don't contribute something good through your anger. This is not a positive thing that can, lead in a good direct, as if Jesus didn't flip over tables and have his anger moments at what he was seeing as corruption and messed up stuff going on in front of him. It reaches in me personally. I was sharing my own story just because when I hear that you were told you were angry as a reason to take you out, it's just frustrating. I feel like that's a gaslighting technique to try and shut someone down and say your opinions aren't valid. Something's wrong with you.
Right, and it perpetuates the yes men on the inside. So all we want on the inside are yes men. If you have a dissenting opinion, you get demoted, you get excluded. So it promotes a lack of critical thinking. It promotes a lack of autonomy. So if you want to fit in, you have to agree. That's what it promotes. That's what the behavior promotes. And they would say the opposite, like you're saying, Nate. They would spin it, and they would say all the opposite things of what they did, and that was tricking the system. So it's like, I'm seeing this thing, but they're saying the opposite.
They keep so many people at arm's length. So hardly anybody ever gets close enough to see the bullshit, right? And the people who start to see the bullshit, who then, and I almost feel like they push the walls out further. So when somebody smells the bullshit over here, they're like, now let's push the wall out further. And then that person ends up leaving, but then the next person who might be in that area, or who might see that sort of crack in the wall, that the wall is further out, so nobody's going to get close enough anymore.
Yeah,
and
that's a great analogy.
They just kept on doing that. So Wes, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Where are you now as far as your spirituality, your faith, and how has your experience in and coming out of Hillsong kind of informed your faith or spiritual journey on this side of your Hillsong experience?
It's a great question.
That's a good buying time answer. That's a really good question.
Yeah, but this is what I've spent a lot of time deconstructing, is nice, neat little boxes of answers. So even just hearing that question, I feel the tension in me of like, yes, I need to be the good Christian. I need to give Nate a really good clean, neat way of responding,
Listen,
so he knows
there
exactly
are
what it
people
is.
who are listening to this podcast who, if they hear that answer, they know, do they trust you and believe anything you have to say, or can they just chuck everything you just said out the window?
Oh my God.
Because your opinion
Yeah.
doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
I say this because we've gotten those questions to our inbox from our podcast.
Yeah.
And like,
what's your label?
are you guys still Christians? Because, that's the way that we're going to figure out, can we
Right.
trust anything you have to say? Which is so funny because we talk about church abuse and I'm like, so if we said we are, then we can do whatever the heck we want, right? Like that works. How do we trick the system? No, I'm just kidding.
I would say, I guess this is as neat as I can say it, I think. I haven't deconverted from Christianity, but I have heavily disaffiliated from the Christianity that I was taught and the culture that got Donald Trump elected and the culture that promotes and fosters white supremacy. That system is rancid. And I think that as I'm studying psychology and religious trauma, I'm seeing there's always distinctions made in the literature between religion and spirituality. And as much as Hillsong always said, we're not a religion, this is a relationship with Jesus, it's a religion. It's a religion.
Yep.
When you organize together, when there's an entity and an institution that is creating rules and regulations and agendas, like that's a religion. And the spirituality side of my personal experience now is very exploratory. It's very nonlinear. It's very it's not in a box. I mean, I'm not worshiping trees, but I have really enjoyed, having grown up with categories and very strict dogma, I've really enjoyed having the autonomy to experience the divine, when and wherever that happens, without someone telling me how to do that. Yeah. I think Jesus is incredible. I think the Bible is powerful, but there's so much that if I met someone on the street who said they were a Christian, that I would probably disagree with them about theologically. Yeah. I don't know if I said it was neat. That wasn't very neat.
I like it though. It reminds me of something you said on Janice's podcast, when I think she used to ask her guests if they were Christians, and she doesn't do that anymore. But I liked what you said there, and it resonated with me. This idea of not trying to pigeonhole. If somebody says they're a Christian, I'm not going to say, well, that's not my kind of Christian. Because the other thing that then what that brought to my mind was, if we keep doing the no true Scotsman thing with people how do we hold anyone accountable, right? Because we can easily just say, oh, the Trump supporters, they're not real Christians. But they claim
That's
to
such
be.
an easy answer, right?
Yeah.
And they'll look at me and say, I'm not a real Christian because I'm a social justice, liberal, woke culture warrior, whatever other labels they want to stick on me. Like, we could all play this game.
Right.
If you're not the real Christian, I am. And it's a little bit harder to come to terms with if we say we are. Maybe we all have to have these conversations together, even if they're really messy and difficult. And
where I was going with that was that the people who identify as Christian and want to fold themselves into that banner, and those of us who don't feel comfortable with what they're doing, try to distance ourselves by saying, well, they're not real Christians, but we're the real Christians over here. Then those people are never held accountable by anyone, and their actions can be written off as, something else. But from the outside looking in, they are, right? To the non-Christians, those people are Christians because they claim to be. So someone has to hold them accountable. I don't know. That's
I went into the comments section on the Hillsong documentary, wherever it was being promoted, and I saw that the Christians were explaining that those Hillsong people were just not real. They have watery doctrine, and so like don't worry. This is not a reflection on Christianity. This is just a Hillsong thing, and I think I can't speak outside of white evangelicalism because that is beyond what I've been raised in and what I know very well, but I can speak from white evangelical Christianity and say megachurch, no megachurch, doesn't matter to me. I see this pattern and these problems all over the place.
Yeah.
All over the place in more patriarchal churches, less patriarchal churches. And, somebody was saying, oh, it's the real issues are patriarchy. And I'm like, those are not the only hierarchical issues that exist inside of white evangelicalism. White supremacy exists. Just even any sort of hierarchy. The fact that at Hillsong, the different levels you have to jump through to get anywhere up. Nate, you talking last time about how cool it was to be able to say you met your own pastor and had the smallest conversation with him is such a ladder to climb. It's such a level of hierarchy that, that's problematic all by itself. And these exist on smaller scales in different places. But I agree with you. I think distancing ourselves is unhelpful to challenging what's wrong and what we need to be able to talk openly about as problems, such as white supremacy and all the other stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, there's such a tension between, and Nate, you wanted to talk about the tension between being a victim and a perpetrator.
Yeah.
By being a volunteer and a leader in Hillsong, which I was. And it's so complex because there's the systemic component to my involvement. And like what you're talking about, Gail, the systemic component to this, the Christianity covers a lot of these isms and these problems. And then there's the individual component. As an individual, do I distance myself so that I can process and heal? Do I stay in the system to help change it? I'm sure we all know people that they're still there because they're being the change, they're being the leader that they wanted,
and that's a tension we all have to live in as we look at the systems that we are a part of. Wes, thank you again so much for joining us. This has been an amazing conversation. So I guess what are you up to these days? What are some things that you're working on? Do you have anything creative that you want to share, or are you just doing your work and keeping your head down?
I'm keeping my head down. Yeah, I don't have any plugs, though I appreciate you asking. I'm going to be starting in private practice this summer and learning a lot about religious trauma, and going to be working with folks that are, that don't have that foundation like you were talking about, Gail. And this is obviously a very personal process for me that I want to be a helper for others with. So, but thank you for having me. It was really, really lovely talking to you both.
That wraps up another episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And if you don't already have one, head over to our website, fullmutuality.com, for a list of all the apps you can find us on.
We couldn't do this without you, our listeners, so thank you so much for your continued support. Speaking of support, one of the best things you can do for us is to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.
I'm pretty sure 5-star reviews get you an extra crown in heaven.
But seriously, if you found this episode insightful, spread the word and share it with your friends.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Full Mutuality. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast.